Hi, everyone, and welcome to this ArtsQuest at Home programming. You're here for the movie talk of Mansfield Park. My name is Addison Young, and I'm so excited to have you here today. Before we get going, I want to make sure I thank our sponsor, BSI, that helps make this programming possible. Also, want to thank you guys for, of course, coming and listening to this movie talk. We can't wait to share our thoughts, feelings, and insight on this film with you. Yeah, and thank you so much if you donated as well. That also really helps us, keep doing what we love to do, which is, present art and present these movie talks and comedy shows and all of that fun stuff. Which, speaking of comedy shows, if you're hoping to check some out this week, we have two fantastic shows for you coming up on Thursday at 8 o'clock. We have a game show called Friend, Family, Follower. A lot of fun where we have a panel and guests of honor, and they have on a family member, a friend, and someone that just follows them on social media, and they're all asked questions about the guest of honor, and they have to see who answers correctly. So that's a lot of fun, and that's at 8 o'clock on Thursday. You can register for that online just like you did for this movie talk. And then after that, we have the show Bad Advice at 9:30, where John Lunger and two awesome comics, Aaron Alcasov and Tammy Cantalina, are going to be talking about just bad advice. So they're going to give you bad advice for all the problems you have, so you can write those in during the show, and they'll talk back with you and give you the worst advice you could possibly get. But today you guys are here to talk about the film Mansfield Park, and I have two people on with me who are also going to talk and share their insight. First up, he also works with me at ArtsQuest. He's the cinema specialist. It's Anthony Desanctis. Hi, Anthony.
Hello. How's it going?
Hi, good. And also with us, he's a professor at Lehigh University. He's also on our cinema committee and has a huge amount of knowledge on Jane Austen and all of the works involved. So I'm very excited to talk with Michael again on this. So please welcome Michael Cramp. Michael, are you here?
Michael?
Sorry, I thought you were going to turn me on. I'm
No
sorry.
worries.
Thank you, Addison. Just a little bit confused. I'm
All
all
right.
happy to be here. Thanks so much.
Yeah. So I just want to start off with asking about your general thoughts of the film. Do you like this film? Hate this film? Neutral on this film?
Michael, you can go first.
No, Anthony, you said you watched this film for the first time today, so I think that it's fresh in your mind. I think you should definitely go first.
Well, first, just let me say that I am a sucker for any sort of British period piece whatsoever. I think I'll always enjoy them, whether or not, obviously some are better than others, but I really enjoyed it. This is the only exposure I have to Mansfield Park, so I can't judge it against anything else, but I mean, I thought it was a great character piece. It had a lot of what I have come to be familiar with Austen of. I laughed quite a bit. I thought Frances O'Connor was very charming in the lead role of Fanny, and yeah, I was a big fan of it. Big fan. So very 90s, but big fan. So.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to learn more talking to the two of you about the 90s. I mean, I was in college and grad school in the 90s. I mean, there was something about a red dress or blue dress, or I don't even remember now. There was something about a dress, but the 90s is kind of a blur to me. I mean, I was in library archives the whole time. I love this movie. Just in terms of context, or just in terms of framing, I guess. Most people who love Jane Austen movies hate this movie because it's this is sort of I believe this movie comes out in 1999, and I believe this is really the last of that first generation of the Hollywood craze for Austen. It's sort of the last film, of the Clueless, the couple of Emmas, couple of one Pride and Prejudice series. It's really the last in that series of the first Hollywood vogue for Austen. And it is a film, there was a really famous New York Times article written by Claudia Johnson, who is a brilliant Austen scholar at Princeton, who's actually my professor when I was an undergrad. And she talks about how this was an adaptation that was just so special because it wasn't just trying to make Austen into a period piece, but it was really an adaptation. It was really a filmic adaptation. And I love that. I love the fact that this film takes liberties. I love the fact that this film pushes, and it allows us to see a side of Austen that we don't normally get to see in Hollywood adaptations. And so I think that's really interesting. It pissed a lot of people off. And I think it often gets forgotten about in the sort of Sense and Sensibility, Emma Thompson, Keira Knightley, Pride and Prejudice, Love Fest. But I think it really deserves discussion.
Yeah. I also love this movie. So I've not read the book either. I know I need to, and I have the giant like Jane Austen compilation book that I'm working my way through, so I'll get to it. But this is my second time having watched Mansfield Park, and definitely like noticed a lot more about it the second time going through it. I think I watched it back in high school before I was a film scholar, noticing all of the, intricacies of this film. And I noticed off the bat too, what is interesting is it says at the very beginning of the film that this is based on the novel and letters from Jane Austen. So it's, based on her as well and her life, which I think is really interesting. And, should be noted that it's not just trying to imitate the novel. It's taking her whole life into account too. Yeah.
As well as her juvenilia, which was really controversial. So the things that Fanny are writing, the literature and stories and sort of funny documents that Fanny's writing throughout the movie, many of those are Austen's letters, of course. Many of them are letters that Fanny writes in the novel. Some of them are actually Austen's juvenilia. One of them is quite famously called The History of England, which is a piece of juvenilia that Jane Austen writes when she's very, very young in her teenage years. And this really pissed off Austen purists, that this was attributed to Fanny Price. But that's the kind of liberty that I love in this film, is that it's truly an adaptation, and it kind of helps us think about the way in which, we do that all the time, for example, with Shakespeare, right?
Yeah.
In terms of like Shakespeare in Love or something. And nobody throws a fit or nobody goes nuts about it. But I think with Austen, it causes a lot of problems because of adulation and idolization of Austen. But I think it's really interesting to do that here in this movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that a lot too. I also think it's like important with Jane Austen films. My biggest critique, and I even have this critique of this film though as well, is in Jane Austen's novels, there are a lot of characters, and I find a lot of them very unnecessary. And, I think that that's like an important liberty to take when making a film, because like some of them just don't serve the plot in a way that for a film translates. I know this is like getting into our Pride and Prejudice talk for next week, but like, I think that's a critique that's always happening with Keira Knightley film. But rewatching the other series and having read Pride and Prejudice, like there's just too many characters that don't move the plot along. And like, I think it's fine to cut them. And even in this film, like there's the other sister whose name I don't even have written down because she is so inconsequential to this plot. Like all that happens is she is there. The sister says, I want my sister to come with me on my honeymoon. And then we like see her at the end. Like she's in scenes, but like I don't feel that there's anything to her character that really adds to things moving in this film. And like if she was not in it, you would hit all the same beats.
There's a mini series of this too, right? That came out later. I mean, if I had to assume, she's probably in that. But as you said, it is a film. You are under kind of a time limit. And it's like, we have to get the juicy stuff, the stuff that's going to make the best film. The goal of any film adaptation, in my own opinion, should be you honor the source material, but you have to make the best film you can. The book is there to take your liberties with, but honor the spirit of the book. And I think, yeah, if you have to lose characters along the way for that, so be it. But no, I'm watching this movie now that you say that. I don't really know what else that sister could have done. Like, I'm trying to imagine like giving her a subplot or something, but I don't think it helps really the film in any way. So,
I mean, she's a really important character in the book in terms of, negotiating romance and, but it's also archetypal, right? You need the two sisters so you can add Fanny and have three, so you can have three young females in the house. And, but I like the point you make. I think it's really smart, and I think Rosema makes a reference to exactly this. If you remember the moment when Mr. Norris, the old clergyman, dies, and basically we never get to meet him. We're just told that he suddenly dies, and we literally get a scene in which he just sort of collapses, right?
Yep.
And I think that's sort of a reference to the kind of technique that you're talking about, Addison. That And even in the book, he's not all that. He's really not an important character at all. We never really get to meet him. His character's never developed, but he needs to be there essentially so he can die. He's a placeholder, and I think that Rosanna kind of has a little fun with that in the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I loved that scene though, by the way. I think that told us a lot about Mrs. Norris too. It's just like such a quick scene of just this doesn't bother her. That's just, he's gone and she's moving on. So, yeah.
And she's got to be one of the most unredemptive characters in all of Jane Austen.
Oh, yeah. She's terrible. I'm amazed at how, I guess it's interesting too, because go back to, we're going to talk so much about Pride and Prejudice next week, but like Pride and Prejudice is mine, and I think a lot of people's first introduction to Jane Austen. And, we get this more flowery tale that is about love. And there's characters that are frustrating in Pride and Prejudice, but not to the level of evil that I think we start getting in this book, where Mrs. Norris is like Mrs. Norris and she's terrible and they all treat her so poorly. It's just like that first scene, like we get it off the bat when she's coming in to the home and the doors open and they just hear her talking about her. And it's just like, wow, like this is beyond the level of, society that's in Pride and Prejudice. We talk about society in like all of her books of, where people are in society, but this is like truly like she's beneath you guys and you have to remember that. And we don't care really what happens to her. I felt like was just so mean in this from both Ms. Norris and Sir Thomas too, of just not good people.
No. And I think, so, I mean, it might be worth adding a little bit of background here that maybe is useful and maybe is not. A couple things to keep in mind. I mean, I think that, when you say, Addison, just not good people, a couple things to keep in mind, right? I mean, so this novel is published in 1814. And it's really the first of Austen's mature adult novels. And what I mean by that is that it's the first novel that she completes entirely. Let me rephrase that. It's the first novel that she writes entirely as an adult. So Northanger Abbey, Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, if you count the Watsons as a fragment, these are all stories that she begins. Even Lady Susan, the story that was adapted into the movie Love and Friendship, which is actually another Austen title of another story called Love and Friendship, from her juvenilia, which is an odd fact. These are all stories that she writes that she begins writing as a teenager, and then her father gets sick, and they relocate to Bath. And essentially, nothing good in Jane Austen. One of the great ironies of the Austen adoration is that Austen hates Bath. Nothing good happens in Bath. I mean, if you go through Austen's stories, I mean, almost to a T, nothing good comes of Bath, goes to Bath, ever takes place in Bath. There's minor exceptions in Northanger Abbey, but Austen had a miserable time in Bath because her father's dying. Her father dies. They relocate to Chawton House with her older brother, who had become wealthy and gained aristocratic standing as a member of the Knight family. So they go to Chawton House, and she starts writing her mature novels, Mansfield Park, Emma, and Persuasion. So Mansfield Park becomes the first of these, and it's often seen as the first truly moralistic novel of Austen's. And that's been challenged by many people, including myself. But it's the novel in which we often read as Fanny Price becoming the moral center of the community. And so we can think about it as, Mansfield Park is sort of being, for those of you who remember, Edgar Allan Poe's Fall of the House of Usher or something, it's almost like the fall of the House of Mansfield, right? That Mansfield is a house that is falling apart. It's got these fissures and cracks in it. And it desperately needs Fanny to be the moral center of the universe to hold it together and to repair it. The other really important context here, I think, that is crucial to keep in mind is the name Mansfield Park is, of course, not accidental or simply haphazard. The name Mansfield, of course, resonates with the late 18th century Mansfield judgment, which is the legal case in England that bans slavery in England. Now, again, I'm saying that specifically. In other words, it doesn't ban the slave trade. It doesn't ban slavery in the empire. It bans slavery in England, in a terminology that I'm going to misquote. but the terminology is something like English air is too pure for slaves to breathe. And so the thought on this, and this gets referenced and alluded to early on in the film, right, is that you could bring slaves within, within a couple of yards of English soil, but if they got onto English soil, they were free. And so you had to like dock them a couple of yards off the soil. And that's what, of course, Fanny hears as she's on her way to Mansfield early in the film. And so these are, I think, really important contexts to keep in mind as we're talking about the people in the film, right? That Austen is a grown woman by the time she's writing these stories. She is no longer a happy-go-lucky kid or a teenager who's making fun of people, typically to make fun of people. She's taking on major cultural issues of her time. And slavery is one of them. Now that's something that I think most casual Austen readers don't know about or don't want to confront or would just prefer to kind of keep to the side. Rossema was, I think, really revolutionary in 1999 to make this not just a feature of the film, but I would say an overwhelmingly central feature of the film for Mansfield Park.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, she doesn't shy away from it at all. Like that's, you said, we hear it in the beginning when she's coming in. They totally describe the slave ships. And then for me, a big part is just her discovering Thomas's drawings, which are like graphic. Like she doesn't hide away from that at all when he's sick and they find those pictures from Antigua, I think it's where they go, right? And, Sir Thomas is in the pictures as well. And it's depicting just horrible abuse and rape. And that's just shown in the film. I think that's as graphic as you could go for the rating this film is just to show those images, but really like sticks it to the point of like, the slaves aren't coming here, but this is the terrible stuff that England is participating in.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm hoping that people, that Craig and Katie and others who might watch this. We don't know about, in the book, we're not told, and then Tom brought back this drawing book and there were these graphic images. That's not in the book, right? That's the kind of liberty that Rossema's taking. There are allusions, there's plenty of allusions to the slavery and the abuses on the Bertram plantation, and more importantly, the problems on the Bertram plantation in Antigua. There's plenty of allusions. She's not crazy to make these connections, but she is taking liberties. And I think that's really important to note in the film. I want to show another clip, Addison and Anthony, but I wanted to get your feedback on that clip and how you think about the representation specifically of Fanny here.
Addison, all you.
I feel like you're like the kid that didn't do his homework, Anthony, and now I have to answer.
I watched. I'm
no.
Good processing.
I took a lot of notes on this scene, and it's amusing because I actually didn't focus so much on Fanny as I did on, I'm so bad with character names. I wrote down the other person. What's her name? Mary Crawford. Because I wrote down, her line of selfishness must always be forgiven because there's no cure. It was just like, oh, we know her character in a nutshell in this scene. Like she's going to do what serves her. And clearly her taking in Fanny is of her means and not of Fanny. She's not really taking her in out of the cold. She wants to get the skinny on Edmund and find out if, he's attracted to her. And I think she knows that she has to be nice to Fanny and has to form a bond to get Edmund's attention.
Yeah. No, she's definitely using Fanny, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think later on then it shows, this kind of hints at that, but towards the end of the film, I think with like 5 minutes left, when Edmund kind of tells her off, like right before that, you do learn like her true colors, where it says like when Thomas is about to die and she basically says, then Edmund will be the first son and all that, making it sound like she's really trying to support Edmund, but in reality, it's all about her benefit. She's saying this is almost like, well, then I'm going to be taken care of and all that. But yeah, no, clearly a very selfish character. So the Crawfords are clearly there for their own interest. So
absolutely. I think one word that was often used to describe them is cosmopolitan, right? Who wants to give the coarse old father a big squeeze?
Thank you.
I'm sorry?
I said, no, thank you.
Yeah, Anthony, thoughts on Fanny's return home?
Yeah,
I
well,
mean,
it's interesting now that you like. Sorry, Anthony, do you want to?
no, go ahead. I insist. I'll follow up.
Well, now that we watched that other scene where Fanny's being looked at to have the dad do that same thing is interesting, as well. Of like, turn around, let's take a look at you. But then he follows it up with I'm just teasing, and has like a hug, like an actual intimate family moment. It feels like to me. Also, the scene I found interesting when I was watching it because right before this she says she wants to go back to Portsmouth, and she kind of is excited to be around people where she's the equal of. She's constantly being looked down upon at Mansfield Park, and then we see once she gets there, she's no longer the equal there either, and isn't really in place upon arrival. So
it kind of just seems like at either place she has like one person who really understands her sister, and then Edmund. It's like she has that one piece of comfort, but really I think if she didn't have either of them, she wouldn't really know where she belonged. Granted, having one constant in either place probably also doesn't help the situation. But no, she came there, and I mean, she'd been gone for how long, right? Like half her siblings didn't know who she was. She showed up and had more siblings than when she left.
Yeah.
It was fascinating. It's like, I think she just tried to get away because she couldn't be in Mansfield Park, but then she goes back and I also can't be there. So I don't know. I also took the dad hugging thing as having a bad history. So it made me very uncomfortable, and rewatching that right there made me even more uncomfortable. So
and there's plenty of suggestion in the book that it should be uncomfortable, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is I love the way in which this scene is set. This sort of coastal rock settlement. It reminds me, this is going to be crass, but it reminds me a little bit of the setting for the Monty Python meaning of life scene where every sperm is sacred or something. You can imagine like there's another kid that's going to be born at any moment or something. But there is that sense here where there's just like random progeny like all around. There's slops of food everywhere. But the Price household is dirty, it's dark, it's messy. It's not at all like Mansfield Park, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet the same kind of whether it's more than just objectification, right? There's like a sinister level of abuse. There are even plenty of suggestions in the book of incest that are taking place in Mansfield Park, and this is part, I think, of why Fanny is so important as a moral center. It's also part of what's so important to understand about that sort of fall of the House of Mansfield, that this generation of the aristocracy, of which Sir Bertram, right, is the representative. Sir Bertram, Lady Bertram, those people, that generation is crumbling. It's falling apart. The sort of Darcys of the world that we celebrate and love in Pride and Prejudice, that's not continuing, right? One way to think about that is Darcy is about as good as it gets, right? But that's not realistic. There's one Darcy, and he was like 10 years ago, right? Now you're getting a lot of these Sir Thomases, and they're a bunch of abusive figures, right? Mm-hmm. And you're getting people like the Prices, and I love the way Rosanna captures this, where he clearly has an incestuous or abusive relationship with Fanny. Something's not quite right there. And I think that the film does a beautiful, beautiful job of capturing that.
Yeah. I think that's the part that bothers me the most with the ending of this film is like, I love Edmund, and I love that she ends up with him. I think he's like a great character, but then she's still like in this Mansfield Park setting, like she's just down the street and hasn't really escaped this family still, which is what I would hope for her, but still Sir Thomas is just down the road. So
I mean, you think Edmund, like, once they're married, like, sticks up for her, like, this is my wife, she's better than all of you, be nice.
Well,
I mean,
that too is like, I don't feel like we ever see that Edmund knows anything that Sir Thomas is doing. Like, those scenes are all very separate. Like, I think the way Edmund speaks of his father is with a lot of respect, and he doesn't ever really see what he's doing to Fanny.
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, I have to say that the scene that really like upset me the most, actually, I'm gonna label this the worst scolding in cinema history. When Fanny says she's not gonna marry Crawford, and Sir Bertram basically just kind of scolds her constantly. It's almost like a montage where it's just, now we're in this room and I'm telling you all the things that you are that are wrong, and now we're in this room and you're wrong again, and we're in this room and you mean nothing. I'm like, has this been going on for days? Like, literally, I felt so bad for her at that part, and like, I think in that moment I truly hated him. So I was like, because I thought to that moment, like, you almost get the feeling that Sir Bertram may not be terrible towards her. Like, he's like there's a family, but he has moments of lightness with her. But then as soon as she says, I'm not going to marry Crawford, it just kind of a switch flipped. You know what I mean? And I was just completely surprised and devastated. But yeah, worst scolding in history, in my opinion. So,
Can I ask you a question about that, Anthony? I mean,
yeah.
I love Harold Pinter in this role. I know Harold Pinter not really as an actor, but I mean, he's a famous dramatist. I mean, he's best known for his plays, for the plays he writes, But I think he's brilliant in that role. I mean, why is he so upset about that? It's not. Fanny's not his daughter.
No, and that's maybe I kind of think that, like, maybe from the way I saw it, maybe it's almost like, yeah, she's not his daughter, but there were times he did seem fatherly towards her and maybe considered her like a daughter. And as soon as she said she wasn't going to marry him, it's like, well, then you are definitely not my daughter. Any fatherly things I thought towards you are gone, because maybe that's what he would have wanted his own daughter to do. I don't know. It just kind of seemed like from the moment she said she wasn't marrying him, like something changed in their relationship. So.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right about that. I'm just wondering why. I mean, I think it's worth speculating. Why is it that pisses him off so much? I mean, to put it in perspective, Mariah, who marries an idiot, I mean, he knows she's marrying an idiot. He knows that, and he supports it.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because for that scene, he's like, well, if you don't want to, we can break off this, like, communication with the family at once. If this isn't what you want to do, we'll figure it out. So for her, he's like totally doting. He's like, yeah, we can end this relationship with that family. We'll find another guy for you. And she's like, nope, I'm going to marry him for all the wrong reasons, and I want to do it soon.
Yeah. Maybe he does want her to, like, succeed and have it all, but from a more like materialistic, self-gaining standpoint rather than for love. And maybe he just couldn't comprehend that. It's like, you are throwing away a real chance at success here to become your own person, and that's disappointing. Again, I could be completely wrong.
I think you're giving him too much credit. I think if I'm gonna put anything to that, I think it's more that, like, it's an insult to him, because, like, he's proud that, like, this guy is interested in her, and it's like, of course, like, I've successfully done this match for you, basically, and now you're going to, how dare you not accept this wonderful thing I've done for you?
I mean, I think that makes sense. I think what Anthony says makes sense. Let me throw out one more possibility, which is just really simple and basic based on what I've said already. Mm-hmm. There's a way in which Fanny functions as his slave in the story. And, she has, I mean, in other words, he doesn't even imagine Fanny here as making a choice. This is simply what she is to do. And the fact that she turns it down is almost unfathomable for him. Mm-hmm. He struggles to comprehend it, right? Which I think, again, speaks to his sort of, power as an aristocratic male. It also speaks to, like, this sort of moment of decay or transition for this generation of the aristocracy, right? That they are used to just having their way. And the fact that they don't have their way here, it tells us something's wrong. Just to sort of, again, put this sort of, transition in perspective, Knightley is like this ideal. Thomas Bertram is like moment of decay, threshold moment where things are falling apart. In Emma, you get Mr. Woodhouse, who, if you remember, right, is like an old, decrepit, atrophied figure who, as an aristocratic man, can't do anything anymore, right? And so you get this like steady decline of the aristocracy, especially in its male figures, in these mature novels in Austen. What about Lady Bertram? You haven't said. I mean, Lady Bertram has got to be one of the most amusing characters in all of Austen. I mean, we should all aspire to be Lady Bertram. I mean, you're drunk all day, dog on your lap. I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, Anthony, this would be perfect for you. All you need is showtime, and you're good.
Yeah, basically, I can keep logging more films. She does also offer. She offers Fanny a puppy as a wedding gift, if I remember correctly. Her only contribution to that scene. Sir Bertram scolds her, and then, and we'll give you a puppy. You know. Yeah. I enjoyed her. I apologize if this is a stupid question, but her sister, which is Fanny's mother, right? That's my understanding. Am I correct in assuming that? Yeah. Were they the same actress? Because they
were. I was gonna bring that up. Yeah, okay, it's the same actress.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I gotta say even more props to the actress, because she's real stern as the mother, and then just has this fun, bubbly performance. I wish she had more lines. I wish she interrupted more scenes, truthfully. I think she probably has like 8 lines in the entire film. But I really enjoyed her character. I almost wonder, like, did they ever say why she and Sir Bertram like are together? Like, was that like an arranged thing? Did they marry for love?
There is some reference to it in the opening pages of the novel, and it is like and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on this, and I don't have my books here at home with me. There is a reference to it, and it is like something witty, because Fanny's mother, Mrs. Norris, and Lady Bertram are the sisters, and so it is like again, as you would imagine, the sort of archetypal reference to the 3 sisters, right? Who marry 3 different men, and like that's the origin of the story, right? And I'm forgetting why they each marry whom they marry, but there is a reference to it in the opening pages.
Got it.
Yeah, I remember that Fanny's mom, so Mrs. Price, did say, remember that I married for love, and basically kind of like looks around and is like, is this what you want to do?
That is true. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, Addison, do you have other thoughts or questions you want to ask? Do you want to take questions? Anthony, do you have other things you want to deal with?
Well, I told you this like beforehand, but like, because this was made in the 90s and I've tragically seen too many films, and again, this is my first exposure to this, like knowing the actors in this film and the type of roles they played, I was kind of just able to figure out where the story was going to go from the beginning. Like Johnny Lee Miller plays Edmund. This is around the time he's getting big. He had just done Hackers and Train Spotting, and I'm like, all right, he's clearly the love interest. Like first scene I see with him, like this is going to be the guy she falls for. Alessandra, I believe that's his name, Nivolo, who was in Face Off and is in a bunch of other things. Laurel Canyon, always kind of plays that charming, cocky guy who has a bit of a secret. And I'm like, oh, there's no way she's going to end up with this guy. Like, this is going to be a flirtation, and then it's going to go the other way. The only character I was truly surprised by, even though she did mention that it's okay to be selfish, was Emmeth Davids, who was Mary Crawford, mostly because in the 90s, before this, she was Miss Honey and Matilda. So I was expecting this sweet, sweet girl, and nope, selfish. But that's all. Like I said, I'm typecasting in my head, and I know actors are capable of more than playing one type. But I was able to predict certain things from this movie just due to typecasting. But that's not related to Jane Austen, just my tragic no life. So, that's all.
Because I feel like you can predict this plot because of just how the characters are and when they're introduced, because of the Jane Austen archetypes, where it's like, well, these two are coming in, the brother and sister, the Crawfords, like, they're not good. Like, I just feel like you see them and you're like, this can't be good. This guy's, because I had not seen that actor before and I don't really recognize him from other stuff, but I'll have to look it up. I probably do. Just like, when you get the pretty boy introduced in a Jane Austen novel, you're like, oh, we're going to like him for like a second, and then he's going to turn real bad, and he's got secrets. So that's how that usually goes.
You'd be surprised. I mean, just talking about that actor quick, Alessandro, whatever. If you look up his credits, I'm sure you've seen him in a bunch of stuff. He's one of those guys who just is kind of in everything, and you always forget his name. But
okay.
Yeah, I probably should have been able to figure out a lot more of this just from being familiar with other Jane Austen stuff and other, like, I mean, I'm sure at the time this was a bit more, revolutionary, but like just having seen movies and read books, it's like everybody steals from Austen. You know what I mean? If I watch any Hallmark movie, I can get these kind of character types now, and it's like I should be able to figure this out. But they don't have but those movies don't have the heart and the soul and the spirits of Austen's works. So, but yeah, so I blame myself. Thank you, Edison.
Well, I wanted to bring up though too, because last time we talked about in Emma, the clergy figure in Emma, and as well as like the clergy figure in Pride and Prejudice. Usually Jane Austen casts those types as kind of these buffoons is the word I want to use. But then now we have Edmund, who at least in this depiction is like pretty perfect. Like he's a very moral guy. He falls for the wrong girl, but the second he sees that who she really is like, nope, you're out of here, and here's why. He's a very kind person. I like too for this novel in this time period, he's pro crying, which is really like sweet. He's like, oh yeah, cry, it makes your hair grow longer. And we see him be very emotional in a lot of points in this film. So he's like a really strong male character, I feel like, that breaks down those like macho archetypes. And as a clergyman, he's an actual good guy who wants to like meditate on scripture. So
no, his name Edmund is really important. And I think everything you say, Addison, is right about his sort of identity as a clergyman. And again, so this is the book that got the Prince Regent all excited about the representation of the clergy. In some ways, he's almost like too good of a figure. He's often associated, there's even a reference in the book directly to this, with the Anglo-Irish political thinker Edmund Burke, who writes the really famous work called Reflections on the Revolution in France, which is published directly after the storming of the Bastille, where Burke, it's kind of like it's one of the great statements of Western conservative political ideology, where Burke basically says, look, these crazy nutcases in France just started a revolution, and we in England don't act that way. So we have morals, we have manners, we have laws, we have customs, and those freaks over across the channel are losing it. And we need, but what he's really doing is he's trying to warn people here in England to make sure that whatever the hell took place in France doesn't cross the 90 miles to Portsmouth, right? Which that does not migrate over to England. And so Edmund is sort of this representation of Edmund Burke and that conservative ideology. So he's wonderful, he's kind, he's gentle. As I think Anthony was suggesting, his failing is he's also blind. I mean, like in other words, his great morality, his kindness, his gentleness, it also blinds him from the realities of the world. And that's, I think, part of Austen's critique of Edmund, and indeed that sort of clergyman mentality, or that conservative ideology that we see in the novel, is that you can be a wonderful moral human being, but unless you know the ways of the world, unless you're exposed to them, you're blind and you're ignorant. And one of the wonderful things about Fanny, of course, is that she, for good or for bad, she does kind of get exposed to those ways of the world. She learns them, right? She gets sent back to Portsmouth. She gets manipulated by Sir Thomas. And that introduces her to something different.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we're at the point where if we want to take questions, if anyone has questions for us, you can write to us in the chat. We'll give you a minute to do that.
So I have a question. How many published novels does Jane Austen have?
So this is kind of 6. She has 6 novels that were published. But it's kind of a trick question in that 5 of them were published in her lifetime, and then the 6th, really, Northanger Abbey and Persuasion are so really 4 are published in her lifetime, and then 2, Northanger Abbey and Persuasion, are published posthumously right after she dies.
Okay. Are there film adaptations of all of these? Because I would like to watch every.
Yes, there's film adaptations of one kind or another of all of these.
Okay.
There's also, which I have not seen this, and I would love to see this, and I can't believe I haven't seen it. There's also a really great, really fascinating, interesting story called Sanditon, which she started after she wrote Persuasion. So Sanditon is one of the last things she wrote before she dies of Addison's disease. And it's sort of a funny, witty, sardonic story set on the coast, and it's not finished, of course, but it's really, really interesting. There's been a lot of scholarship written on it. There was a mini series on it.
I actually just watched the first season of the miniseries. I think that there's going to be more. But it was very good and it's really interesting. They definitely they get a lot ahead of the novel, which I guess you have to because it's not been finished, so you have to take liberties and make up the plot as you go. But I really enjoyed it. It's on Masterpiece Classics if you do the add-on on Amazon. Yes, we got like the Amazon add-on to have all the Masterpiece access.
I'm gonna have to get that. So yeah, I've read 2 Austen novels. I read Pride and Prejudice in high school, and I've also read Emma. I'm a very busy man right now, so I don't know if I can read these other books, but I have every film adaptation of her works I've seen, I've loved. I mean, clearly this woman, her stuff is timeless, and I am loving everything I'm seeing. I'm excited to consume more and rewatch certain things. So thank you for that. So I will look that up.
What I was going to say, Anthony, is as far as I know, I don't know if there's been a major filmic adaptation of Northanger Abbey, which is an absolute shame because Northanger Abbey is really a spoof on Gothic and horror stories. So it would be an absolutely wonderful film. Northanger Abbey is it's like laugh out loud funny because it's the story of a young woman who believes too much in Gothic and horror stories. And so it would be wonderful on screen. There have been masterpiece theater kind of, adaptations of it, but I don't think there's been a Hollywood. I know there's been a talk about things like that in the works, but I haven't seen one.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I'll try and see if I can find the Masterpiece one. That sounds right up my alley.
Anthony, let's make the major motion picture version. We'll both read it and take this on.
Yeah.
Put our film degrees to use.
Craig Smith sent in a question. We've read that this movie adaptation took some liberties that I, Anthony, have alluded to. One was turning Fanny's character into a somewhat autobiographical depiction of Jane Austen herself. In the novel, is Fanny an autobiographical version of Austen?
No.
No.
No, not at all. I mean, no. Austen's, for somebody who is as famous as Jane Austen, there are a dozen or so biographies written about Jane Austen, but still we don't know a tremendous amount about Jane Austen's life for somebody who is that famous. The big reason for that is that when Jane Austen died and the celebration of her death, it was 203 years ago, I think 2 days ago. She died July 17th, so I guess 3 days ago. Mm-hmm. I think that's right, July 17th or July 18th. But when she died, her sister burns countless letters, and we're not exactly sure how many letters her sister burns, but Jane Austen's sister Cassandra was her closest friend, her constant correspondent. And there's this beautiful comment that Cassandra makes when Jane Austen dies, and I'm going to misquote it, although I have it. Somebody just texted it to me, so I can look it up real quickly. Where she basically says, Jane is dead, and I have lost my only friend, my dearest companion, the gilder. One of the lines I'll never forget. She calls it the gilder of all pleasures, which I think is absolutely fascinating. Here it is. Yes, I will read it to you now because these are the kind of things I do. This is what she writes to her sister on the 18th of July, 1817. Or this is what Cassandra writes when Jane Austen dies. I have lost a treasure, such a sister, such a friend as never can have been surpassed. She was the sun of my life, the gilder of every pleasure, the soother of every sorrow. So Cassandra burns all these letters and correspondence, and so we don't know that much about Jane Austen's life. But no, there's no reason to believe that Fanny Price is an autobiographical representation of Austen.
Got it. Okay. Cool. Addison, any questions on your end?
No, we covered a lot in this. I did just have the funny thought of like I kept thinking of Mrs. Norris as the cat in Harry Potter because that's my first reference of a Mrs. Norris. But that's not who was in this film. Also, okay, well, I'll bring this up too. It's just I have to bring up that I feel like a common thing people let you know before you travel to England is not to say the word fanny because it means something different there than it does here. So seeing that as her name is interesting. I'm sure that's like a more recent thing where the word fanny is not a nice one, but still kind of made me chuckle.
Addison, are you familiar with Fanny Bryce?
Yes.
Yeah, see, the first time I watched this, like I just kept thinking about the comedian. When I watched this already, I just kept expecting comedian Fanny Bryce to come in, sing people are the luckiest people in the world. Like I was expecting a musical halfway through this thing, but you know.
Are you familiar with the late 18th century writer Fanny Burney?
No.
That's a writer who was deeply, deeply influential on Austen.
Okay.
A great amount of her works, but that's a name that I always insist upon calling her by her, more complete name, Frances Burney, because it seems like Fanny Burney is like some like 18th century version of hemorrhoids or something.
Yeah.
I don't think
Fanny
we
Burney.
should do that.
He has Fanny Burney. Yeah.
Yes. Frances Burney is a brilliant novelist, probably best known for a novel called Evelina, which is a novel that is, extremely influential on Austen's career.
Oh, I did think of another thing I wanted to bring up because we talked about it last time, because we somehow got on the topic of Jane Eyre last time, accidentally. How, Charlotte Bronte didn't like Jane Austen, but I found that interesting because in this one we have that brief scene where they're about to put on a play, and that like immediately made me think of Jane Eyre because it felt like a very similar scene where it's like they're doing this play and it's clearly kind of this thing so people can be close to each other and we're acting, so it's fine. So I just felt like it was very similar vibes there, which is more interesting knowing that Charlotte Bronte didn't really like Jane Austen's works. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And that's of course like that's a classic like example of the moral drama in this, within the novel, of people literally sort of exposing their character by playing it on stage, right?
Yeah. All right, well, I think if we don't have any other questions, I think we're good for tonight. Thank you, Michael, again, so much for being on this talk and having all of your insight. It was so much fun to talk with you. And Anthony as well, all of your film knowledge is always,
So we're going to do Pride and Prejudice next week?
Yep, so Pride and Prejudice next week, we're going to be talking a little more broadly about both, the novel, and there's been so many film and television adaptations, so we're talking about all of it.
Which adaptations are we considering?
So the big four we put on the list is the Keira Knightley version, the miniseries, the 1940s version, and just for funsies, we threw on Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies because that came out most recently in 2016. So we've got those, but we also do have a question on our survey, which is out there, about like favorite, least known adaptation, because there are plenty. There's Bride and Prejudice, of course.
Bride and Prejudice is great.
Yeah.
There's also one, sorry, real quick, because I want to recommend this to the two people that are on here. There's a mini series called Lost in Austen, where a girl who reads Pride and Prejudice falls in love with it and somehow gets stuck in that time and basically changes places with Elizabeth Bennet, who comes to London, and she ends up falling for Mr. Darcy and has to choose between that fictional world or the real world, and it's great. So check it out.
Yeah,
I'm still a big proponent of. I never thought Austen Land got the love it deserved. I think Austen Land is a brilliant film. It's been based on the novel, of course, but I think Austen Land gets forgotten about in all this. But those are four great films. Keira Knightley's film is really good, and it'll never get the attention because of the miniseries, but it's a really good film, I think.
Yeah.
That'll be great. But then in my mind, it's 1940s first and everything else, a distant second. So.
Oh, wow.
Bring your A game next week where we debate this. So.
Yeah, Craig and Katie, you better join in to see us deep dive into these opinions. So
the Star Wars one we did, that debate show turned into a bloodbath. So we gotta top that. So
yeah. I think we're gonna have some interesting opinions. We also have on our panel, I just booked an author who writes young adult novels kind of based on Jane Austen works. I need to look up her name real quick because I want to tell you guys what it is, because I just confirmed her and I don't have her put on the list. Oh no. Well, check back on the website when I put her name up, because she's great, and she she writes these YA novels, and her first one was based on Pride and Prejudice. So I hope you'll come and check that out.
Sounds great.
Awesome. Well, thank you all again for joining us, and be safe out there. Wear your mask, wash your hands, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Have a good night, all.
Take care.